It's something that residents are really concerned about, and we have taken notice of that. I do need to thank Jane Snell this evening because she's the one who's managed to get you all here, and she's very much led this campaign, so a round of applause. And of course, I know others of you have also been involved. I won't go through names because time's quite limited tonight. I will say that at the moment we don't know the full situation. There's a lot to be heard tonight and a lot of information to get through. And Heathrow have very kindly come out on a Friday night to enable us to listen and understand what's going on here. After that, we'll be opening it up to questions from you as the residents, and you'll be able to quiz Heathrow. And I'm sure Philip will also want to present his views on this. The meeting may go on. I know Philip's got to go around 8:30. What did you say, 8:30? 8:30. So if those of you still have questions, we will remain behind to answer those, and we'll make sure Philip gets a full brief on that, okay? So we're going to start the meeting by going straight on to Heathrow because they're the ones we need to hear from. If any of you don't get a chance to speak tonight, there are ways of contacting all of us, so please don't worry about that. I'm going to hand you straight over to Heathrow without any further ado, okay? And if we could just really take the time to listen to this because it is quite a complex issue, okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Marissa. And I'm going to actually stand down. I think you'll still be able to see me. You'll certainly be able to hear me because I need to just move through a few slides. So welcome this evening. As Marissa said, thanks so many of you for turning out on a Friday night to hear about some of the trials that we're running. My name's Matt Gorman. I'm the Sustainability and Environment Director for Heathrow Airport. I'm joined tonight by two colleagues from a different company, NATS, the air traffic services provider in the UK. And we'll explain a bit as we go through the presentation how we work together in designing airspace. What we're planning to do is around 15 minutes of presentation up front because we know there are lots of questions, but we think it would help up front if we can set out some information which we hope goes some way to answering those questions, but then quickly open it up to give you a chance to answer any specific questions that you've got. I think before I hand over to my colleague, like to do is to acknowledge the reaction that we've had to these trials. It's clear that for some people the trials have resulted in a concentration of flight paths in different areas from where they've been before, and it's clear that that's caused some distress, some frustration, some anger around these trials, and we are sorry to those of you that have experienced more noise. Just to put on record up front, I'm sure most of you will be aware by now, but the trials will end earlier than originally scheduled. We've been working very closely with NATS and have confirmed that we can get all the data that we need from this phase of trials by the 12th of November rather than running through to January, which had been the original plan. The trials themselves are part of a wider government programme in the UK to modernise airspace. In turn, that's part of a wider European programme to modernise airspace. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. What I would also say up front is that we know that, as I said before, many of you are angry, frustrated about some of what's happened, and understandably concerned about what the future may hold. What I would say up front as well is that these are trials. They will end in November, and that any process of redesigning airspace around Heathrow or in the UK in future would be subject to a full public consultation, and that would be several years away. Now, I know that won't reassure everyone, but I just wanted to be clear up front where this fits as part of the process. And then just to link into the future airspace strategy that I've talked about, airspace in the UK and actually in many parts of Europe hasn't changed for around 40 or 50 years. It was designed some time ago. And across Europe, there's a process to modernise that airspace. And this is new territory, actually, for all of us. It's new territory for the industry, and it offers real opportunities for us to improve the efficiency of airports like Heathrow and air travel. But we really believe it offers opportunities to improve noise as well around the airport, for planes to climb more steeply and therefore be quieter in areas around the airport, and to be able to share noise a bit more fairly around the airport as well. We're really keen to try and do that in the best way we can. We think we're one of the only airports in the world that is actively trialling a number of different ways of managing airspace in order to not just deliver the benefits for the industry and for the travelling public, but also for local residents. But we are on a journey here. We won't get it right the whole time. I'll be absolutely honest about that. One of the things that we've clearly learned from this is that we needed to communicate much better to keep people informed about the trials. I hope the fact that we're here tonight is evidence that we are very much prepared, and we've done a number of these meetings and we have a number more to come, that we're very much prepared to meet local residents, to explain what we're doing and to hear your views. And I would just say, finally, in terms of introduction, that we are committed to working locally to try and find a solution to implement this new programme of airspace design that we're asked to do by the government, but to do it in a way that works for us, but also works locally. So let me just say a little bit up front around the future airspace strategy, just a couple of slides on that. And really just picking up on what I was saying before. So airspace hasn't been redesigned for about 40 or 50 years. And my colleagues from NATS will talk a bit about how we have historically navigated aircraft and how we do that now, and some of the new technology and to navigate aircraft and the opportunities that offers. I've talked a bit about the opportunities to tackle noise. The redesign of airspace offers opportunities to increase efficiency, to reduce delays, to accommodate our future demands to travel to and from the UK, to maintain and enhance safety levels. But as is highlighted on the screen, we're also committed to do that in effective consultation with local communities. Sorry. I think that's probably the end of my slides. Sorry, I think I skipped one ahead. Let me just check that I haven't missed anything vital before I hand on. I think that gives you the key headlines of the future airspace strategy. What I'll do now is just hand over to Dan Foster from NATS, who's going to talk a bit more about the NATS role in airspace.
Good evening, all. So I am Dan Foster. I've recently moved from NATS, so I'm a NATS employee, but I now work with HAL, secondment across to try and work with Heathrow on this development. As you can see up there, Chris Norsworthy, who is the expert sitting behind me, will come and talk to you in a minute. What is NATS? NATS is an acronym. I'm an air traffic controller originally. I will say acronyms all the time. If I say one, can you boo and tell me to explain it? Some of the stuff that will come out is about an acronym called NATS. NATS is used to be National Air Traffic Services. And what we do is we try and move 2.2 million aircraft around the UK's airspace safely and as efficiently as we can. And when the government came to us and said, we would like you to modernise your airspace as best you can, please, because everybody else has to, you have to, we all went, that's going to be quite difficult because we haven't got a lot of room left. And if we want to do it safely and efficiently, which is all we have to do, make sure it's safe, there are areas where when we do an optional trial, and a trial is about options and choices for the future, we won't actually have any options about where we put the trial aircraft. It sounds really silly, but my controllers are really good at what they do. And the reason they're really good is because they practice it all the time. The same thing happens just about every day. And as soon as we introduce something in different, we've got to make sure that's safe for everybody. So one of the things Chris will talk about later is when we started introducing the options for the future, as I said earlier, and I know I've got some critical looks, there aren't actually very many options of where we can put that trial. So this, keep going. That's not a drawing by my daughter. It could have been. That's the airspace below 20,000 feet for the London area alone. And every one of those tracks is an aircraft in one day. And you can see, somebody will ask me later on, whereabouts do you live? Well, I live in Suffolk. And I'm glad you're laughing, because one of the biggest problems I've got is I get really frustrated by aircraft noise from Essex coming from Stansted. And one of the reasons I get really frustrated about aircraft noise from Stansted is that aircraft is being held down because of the integration of everybody else, especially Heathrow. So the ramifications fall across the whole of the London area. The blues, Heathrow, dark blues are the outbounds and the light blues are the inbounds. And then the rest of the multicolour set you can see. But I'll give you some examples. The bright red and pink down to the bottom near Gatwick, they overfly this area because they're being held down by Heathrow aircraft trying to get out. So it's all about how it's all knitted together. Fortunately, the knitting machine that did this was invented in 1960, and they're the aircraft that were being flown. Unfortunately, that aircraft is very like when you're driving a car. The reason the government picked 70 miles an hour on the motorway is because that's what they thought in 1960 with the first motorway you could safely drive at for most cars. So the top one, British European Airways, can safely climb, back in 1960, about a 4-degree climb out. So it's not huge, 4% climb out. So not huge, which means that everything is designed for that aircraft. Unfortunately, we're now flying the 787. I used to be general manager of Farnborough. We had an air show with a 787 and a Spitfire, and the only thing you could hear at the air show was the Spitfire, flying together at the same time. But I can't use that because the airspace is not fit for it. Second thing, looks really peculiar, looks like something's just landed from outer space. That's I'm going to say an acronym because I can't remember the actual thing it means. It's a VOR. It's how you get from A to B if you're an aircraft. Designed before 1960. And they are no longer supportable. They are going. We have no choice. So what we're going to use is satellites, so performance-based navigation. That means the aircraft will fly from A to B on its own. Well, that's what everybody else does. We've all got sat-navs. We know what to do. Unfortunately, what we don't know is when we give an aircraft to fly from A to B at Heathrow, we don't know how accurately it's going to fly. So that's one of the trials we started working with, not just here, but across the whole of the rest of the UK. And across the world. So that's Atlanta. So Atlanta on the left-hand side, pre-performance-based navigation, and on the right-hand side, afterwards. So you can see the difference it could have. So we started some trials. The trials are to investigate certain things for the future in conjunction with the rest of the UK. So there are trials at Stansted. There will be trials there have been trials at Gatwick, and there are trials at Heathrow. If you remember that knitting map right at the beginning from my daughter, there's very few areas on that map which allowed you to do a trial. Bear that in mind when Chris starts talking. And this is Chris Norsworthy.
Thank you very much. So we're going to cover the specifics, the things you'd be really interested in as a local community about the airspace trial itself. It does all hark back to the things that Dan has spoken about. There's two questions mainly that we're trying to answer from a trial point of view as an industry. As the NATS that I work for, primarily, we have to safely accommodate everyone else's commercial requests to make sure that everyone can transit the UK safely. The airport needs to know how accurately aircraft can depart. We need to know how closely we can put routes together, the kind of performance we should expect at different phases of flight. It's very, very detailed and complicated, as Dan says. If I end up slipping into an acronym, just wave or someone else will say so up here. So the two key questions we wanted to ask were, how accurately will you fly? So it's one of those things that's very anecdotal. This word PBN, performance-based technology, everyone will say is really, really accurate. We'll fly it on a hair's breadth. We'll fly it on a line. The industry standards are very different. There's some technicalities around that talk about wandering around by up to a mile. Our experience was, well, there isn't any hard and definitive evidence to gather. We have to make this change. As Dan has said, this legacy equipment is moving away, so therefore we want some hard facts about what can I actually do. Where can we put routes? What will happen if we draw a line over the ground here and attempt to fly it in an aircraft? So here are the legacy routes for Heathrow. I think you can see on there they're numbered in this manner. So route 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 is a key area for the trial area. So that's a current route that heads down towards Midhurst, just because there happens to be one of those beacons there historically. And route 6 is a route that heads out down towards Dover eventually. I think the position of the community and the constituency here puts you around about under the shallow end of route 5 there, just to the west of Egham. So these are run by the Department for Transport, these sways. They're 3 kilometres wide, and in this particular noise-sensitive areas, they were designed to end at 4,000 feet. So that's where you would expect as a local community that noise is heavily monitored to say, well, here's where you would expect these paths to go. Now, again, what you'll find on those routes is that certain aircraft climb very slowly, they're very heavy, they're going a long way, and so the distances involved to get to 4,000 feet might be quite large, the impact might be quite significant. Whereas on a route like Route 5, for example, has some of those aircraft that depart at certain times of the day, but primarily is made up of light aircraft going a relatively short distance around to southern Europe, and will climb very, very quickly. They'll climb, the gradients that Dan was talking about, these things will climb at around about 10%, very, very rapidly. So in terms of your pre-trial departure tracks, you can see that the routes are broadly contained in there. In terms of the breadth of behaviour, at 4,000 feet, air traffic control take hold of that aircraft and say, right, I need to make an efficient path. Safe and efficient are the two names of the game, really. So because of the tracks, we'll jump back to it later if it's helpful, but because of the big swathe picture that Dan showed earlier, there's aircraft orbiting around in there, holding, waiting to land, which is a necessary evil at the moment of the way the system is run. There's a whole host of other work of how you change airspace in the long run that says if you get rid of those roadblocks in the sky, if you get rid of that aircraft that's orbiting around at Egham, which is just down the south there, in between the Woking and Cobham, if you get rid of that block, these aircraft can climb away. We won't need to be doing this route, which is moving out over Ascot and being pulled away to try and make the more coherent path. So that just gives an example of the relatively tight containment at the beginning, the fact we're having to intervene and pull away. You can see in the turn that it's very messy. If you look at the turn that's coming around to the left there, and that also shows you the limited number of options about how you can depart. One of the other rules that we're looking at to try and get some evidence around, current rules for departing from a runway say you need to split routes by 45 degrees now, to get the most efficiency in terms of departures. Now that means if you happen to live under one of those 45-degree options, you are taking a lot of punishment because that's where those aircraft go all the time. It's a legacy system that's put there. As part of trying to expand the menu of options, we don't think that's reasonable anymore. We think we can improve on that number. And one of the key drivers we'll come to later for the positioning of the routes that potentially have impacted yourselves here is because we really want to look at angles much less than that. We want to look at things like 10 degrees, 15, 20-degree angles there, which will expand the menu card in the future and say, well, okay, I don't have to be flying over the same people all the time. We can look at ways of alleviating and using respite. So that's just zoomed in on the area of interest there, Englefield Green. So you can see that's just zoomed in on those pre-trial tracks in terms of what was happening before. This is a relatively small sample that's been used here. This left turn sway that's coming out over Egham is actually a very, very large sway. If you look at that over a period of time, it's heavily affected by a number of factors, including sort of wind and various other factors. But that swathe will stretch out over Englefield Green as well in terms of what you would see on a bigger sample. So what's happened during the trial, just to zoom in and show what's happened. So the route positioning, I'll just flick between that a couple of times so that you can see. That's pre-trial and post-trial. There's pre and there's post. So in terms of the impact, these routes are concentrated. They are more concentrated. We've seen that from the use of the navigation system. That route that was slightly higher away from you is now drawn down towards the village, so it's cutting the corner a little bit stronger in the northeast in order to test these angles and put the other route in terms of departure. And to zoom that out, you can see in progress a couple of factors. So there are the angles highlighted on the screen there. The 10 degrees that's being assessed on one of the routes, the 15 degrees that's being assessed. By association, that gives us 25 degrees to assess as well. So there's the reasoning. One of the key questions that comes up is why are they there? Why are they there? People feeling been picked on or particularly targeted in some way is an accident of the need to get that data. And I would stress, in line with what Matt and Dan have said, this is not permanent. It would be illegal for this to be a permanent placement. This is purely about, I need to know how accurately they're going to track these routes. And it's not accurately in terms of, I'm not a statistician. It's not something that I myself analyse. There is a team of analysts that work every 4 seconds. Will look at very high levels of detail about every aircraft that are coming down these routes to construct a detailed statistical argument about what's happening. The other thing you can see in there we've tried to do is to use this accuracy to work on some options for respite. Now, you can see on here there are 2 splits very, very clearly from each runway. So you can see 2 sort of train tracks coming out on each of these 3 options you can see there. Now, the idea was that at 3 o'clock every day, Heathrow rotates its runways in order to offer some respite on westerlies anyway, in terms of the approach path at the other end and the departures from this end of the runway. Now, typically, these routes are forced together quite quickly. Again, for legacy issues, it was never really considered. They join up quite quickly and they all fly over the same track and hit the same areas and the same communities. What we've tried to do is take advantage of that daily rotation to get an assessment about, okay, concentration of noise potentially is a big impact. That is current policy on what we're told to do, is to concentrate tracks and concentrate noise. What we've looked at is to say, well, okay, when these runways rotate at 3 o'clock, let's keep the routes apart for as long as we can. And you can see the train tracks that run down through Ascot there, the left turn, they join up just abroad the M3 there at Lightwater, and separately on the right turn. So there's one aspect that's measured about whether that's been useful or not in terms of impact. And adherence to route. So here is the earlier trial that ran. This was a trial, again, on that left turn route, essentially the one that impacts yourselves at Englefield Green. There's a bigger sample, actually. You can see what I was talking about on the left turn. There's a much dirtier swathe, if you like, showing how the difference in accuracy between the conventional and the more accurate navigation. So the first trial showed us another form of respite that we looked at, and you can see there are four train tracks there, and this was a slightly different method. So pre-trial, again, everything's being turned away to try and construct the best path to get that aircraft climbing, to get its noise footprint up and away. Over here, you can see that we rotated on a weekly basis this time. So there were 4 routes, and every week we rotated from an inner and an outer arc. So there's 2 different methods there being used as part of the data capture that we're getting, which is purely technical. My interest is to technically work out what we can do with the aeroplanes, what sort of angles we can use, and gather data that means we only have to do this once. We're conscious of the impact. There is also very high cost involved in this type of work. If we do it properly and accurately here, then these mandates, when they come in 2020, will have a bigger menu card to pick from in terms of what we can do, both in terms of capacity from a business point of view and in terms of respite from a community point of view. And that sort of races through some detail.
That's lovely. Thanks, Chris. So I'm just going to say a few things in summary and then open it up in a couple of minutes. The first thing I'd say, actually, is, I mean, I work in this area. I'm not an air traffic controller. I know a bit about it, but I'm conscious always at these events, as we've said, that it's quite a technical area. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible, and I think we've learned a bit. I'm sure we could improve as well. So please, anything that we've said that you don't understand, please do use the question session to ask us that. So just by way of summary, to capture some of the key messages, the changes are temporary. They will help us learn more, as we've talked about, around how we use airspace around Heathrow, how we can improve both for passengers but also for residents. But when the trial stops on the 12th of November, the flight paths will return to the pre-trial patterns that you saw on the presentation. It's important to stress, the third bullet, that these are requirements that the governments across Europe actually have put on airports and on airspace service providers to modernise airspace. So what we're trying to do is to trial in order that when we do introduce changes, we can do those in the best possible way. But any permanent changes, a really key point in the 4th bullet, will be subject to a full public consultation on the routes. There'd need to be an environmental impact assessment, including noise, and a full opportunity for everyone around the airport to input to that. And nothing on that's been decided. I know this is, and I've explained this before to different audiences, and I know it's a really tricky thing to explain, but we're not trialling actual routes that we might use in future. We're trialling, as Chris has explained, some of the techniques to gather enough data, but we're some way off thinking about routes. So please don't think that just because for the last couple of months we've been trialling these particular flight paths that's the plan we've got and that's what we're going to introduce. We're far from that at the moment. And I should say the final point, these are, and I know this may well come up in the question, so let me just preempt it. This is not to do with Heathrow's 3rd runway. If Heathrow never expanded and stayed at the size it is today, we would still need to redesign airspace around the airport, which is why we're doing this. So the next live trials that we might have would be not until autumn 2015, so next year. And I think we've learnt a lot about how we can best communicate on those. Before we did start these trials, we talked to neighbouring local authorities around the airport, neighbouring MPs, and made them aware of what we were planning to do. And what we proposed is that we'd put information on our website and be prepared, of course, to come to meetings like this. The kind of response we've seen to those trials has been more significant in terms of interest and complaints than perhaps we'd expected. So I think we've clearly learnt from that we need to be much more proactive in communicating in future. So we'd be thinking about direct mailing to people in areas that might be affected, newspaper ads, using social media and so on before we do any trials in future. I have to say, experience does tell us as well that it can be quite difficult to actually engage people in what might change before you actually do it. We've certainly found that with past trials, but we will do our very best there. I suppose one good thing we'd say, there has, at least the trials have helped raise awareness of this government programme that we're involved in to modernise airspace, and we'll continue the engagement we've had with elected representatives, both at a council level, at a parliamentary level, around the airport. And just to reiterate the point I made, no changes before a full consultation. I said at the start, this is new territory, and it is. It's the first time in decades, actually, that airspace is changing. And actually, we don't have a choice between leaving things as they are or adopting some of these new navigation practices. In a sense, the rule book that we operate by is being rewritten. So our goal over the next few years is to test ideas, to work with residents and politicians around Heathrow about the best way to do this. And as well as some of the benefits to passengers by operating Heathrow more efficiently, with more resilience when it's bad weather and so on, we also want to make it fair for residents around the airport. And as an airport, we're committed to investing significant amounts of time and resources to do that. As I said up front, I'll be open because I know there'll be some tough questions, and I absolutely anticipate that. We won't get it right every step of the way. I'm sure about that. We are doing our best. I hope the fact we're here is evidence of that, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and we do appreciate you being here tonight. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody, but can I just say a couple of words? First of all, it is a little bit disappointing that we are here having this discussion now. If we'd had this kind... If we had had this kind of engagement before the trials had started, I think we would not have allowed such a lot of speculation, concern, and frankly fear to have taken hold. So there is a really important lesson there. Once people have got an idea in their heads, it's very difficult to remove it. And the idea that people have quite understandably got in their heads is that the airport is trialling potential routes for the future. I heard you say, and this is the crucially important thing, I heard you say that these trials are about testing techniques, about climb rates, about angles of turn, about track-keeping capabilities. They are not about testing specific routes for future use. And I think it would be very helpful to everybody in the room if we could hear you just say that again very loudly and very clearly. That's my first point. My second point is that I understand the technological innovations here, and they have the potential to be positive innovations. But the experience people will have had is that the concentration of noise, i.e. the precision of track keeping, is what has created the problem or intensified the problem. Now, I know, because I was Transport Secretary for a while, that precise track keeping gives you potential opportunities in the future to be able to distribute the burden in a way that is going to provide people with much more respite. I've talked to a lot of people who are experiencing severe noise at the moment, and when they understand that there would be potential in the future to remove aircraft noise for substantial periods of the day, while they might experience it for a few hours at a time, they understand that as something quite different from what they're experiencing at the moment, which is very long periods of continuous noise. So I think the second thing would be, if it's possible for you to just explain and emphasize how the precision that has given rise to the negative experience people have been having is also potentially the way in the future to distributing noise with respite so that people do not experience that continuous burden of aircraft noise that they've seen over the last few days. I call it the Sydney model. I don't know if that's accurate. I think at Sydney they deliberately moved the track across a wide band so that people experience a couple of hours of aircraft noise and then it moves on to somewhere else. And that would indeed be a prize worth having. But I didn't hear those things quite as clearly as I would like to have. And I think we'll assuage a lot of concerns if you could just emphasise them again.
Thank you. So let me do that, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I think you've done a very good job, Mr. Hammond, of summarising very eloquently a couple of the points that we were trying to make. So just to reiterate, I won't shout into the microphone, but I will. I hope you can all hear it. I will say again, we haven't been trialling particular routes. We have been trialling exactly as your MP said. Different techniques, different angles of separation, different climb rates for aircraft. The fact, just to be absolutely clear about what we've done, Chris showed some of the routes that exist around Heathrow. Most of the airspace around Heathrow is following all of the old routes and old systems that we discussed that have been in place since the 1960s. We've selected a couple of routes to trial some of these new techniques, but that means there are some limits on how much space we've got to play with, which is why we've got a relatively limited area where we've been doing some of these trials. But absolutely, this is not about routes. When airspace is redesigned around Heathrow, we'll be able to look at the whole thing together, both the east, west, north and south, think how best we do that and consult on that. And absolutely, the model, we've talked a lot about the idea of respite today. So just to bring that to life a little bit, at the moment, as Chris said, one of the things that we do at Heathrow, we have two runways, one's used for landing and one for takeoff, and we switch them halfway through the day. And we know that for residents around the airport, particularly in West London, because most of the landings at Heathrow are over West London, that's really valued because it means people know that if they get aircraft over them in the morning, in the afternoon they'll have a break from the noise and vice versa. So what we're trying to do with the new airspace technology that's available to us, the concentration, exactly as the Minister, as your MP described, is to say, actually, how can we use that new technology and potentially introduce a number of different routes, but then be able to alternate between them, to rotate them around. So we won't be able to say there'll be no noise at all, but what we hope to be able to say is, actually, we can share it a bit more fairly, and we can give people predictable times when they will have a break from the noise. And you're right that Sydney is an airport that's experimented a lot with that and developed a plan along those lines. So I'll open it up to questions at that point.
We did ask for remote microphones. We've got them, okay? We've got 2 remote microphones, so I will call people for questions, and I see a hand flying immediately in that corner. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, my name is Mike Krishnaraitis. I'm one of the local councillors, and part of your statement you said you consulted with all the local MPs and council reps. As a request, I'd like to see the minutes of those, because I'm pretty sure not all the councillors here were consulted on that. So you kind of put our neck on the block there. I have 2 questions. I understand the need for your trials, but I don't understand how many aircraft you need to count leaving the floor and why you need to do it at 6 in the morning and 11 at night. Could these trials not have been conducted during the day? That's my first question. And my second question, I promise to be very good after that, is why do the trials need to go for such a length of time? How many aircraft do you need to count to be accurate?
Actually, I think, Mike, you did do us a favour stepping in there, because I certainly wasn't consulted either as the county council, and I know my colleagues, I'm looking around the room, they were not consulted either. Philip? No? So we didn't have any information about this, and I really hope going forward, let's not forget that next year you'll be doing more trialling, and then we're moving to the consultation process. And I'd really like your assurance at the end of this evening that you're going to work with us, inform us, and actually, before you leave today, tell us what we can expect to face next year and the year after, so we're all prepared for that. I'd like you to take those questions first, please.
Fine. Let me take those. Well, I'll take one of them. I'm going to pass on to my colleagues who'll be better placed on some of the detail. So on the consultation, just to be absolutely open, and we can send details of this, what we did was to write to the neighbouring authorities and MPs, so it's not the wide area around Heathrow, but those authorities or MPs whose constituencies neighbour with the airport, and invite them to a stakeholder session just before Christmas, before we ran a trial which ran for the first 6 months of this year, and another in July. And a number of local authority officers and others attended those sessions, and we set out at those our plan to put information on our website, to offer meetings, but not to proactively communicate initially. Now, I don't know, I don't have the information with me now on exactly who those were, but we're very happy to be open about how we did communicate and who we wrote to. I'm sorry if that information didn't reach some of you here. Sorry? Yeah, and I don't have the list here of exactly, but we will send that through to you, and I'm sorry if it didn't reach you here. But I would go back to the point I made earlier. Actually, we've learned from this whole experience that just saying, although we thought at the time it was the right approach, we'll put information on the website and we'll respond to requests they come in, just wasn't the right approach. We've clearly learned from that. I think just the sheer number of people here tonight is evidence of that. I take absolutely the point from your MP on that. So I hear that. In terms of the other two questions were on timing of the trials and numbers of aircraft and length of trial, I think. So.
Okay, so the two parts of the question. So the timings. Let me just jump back to one of these, which is potentially useful to us. So the timings. The reason we can't jump in and out of a trial in the middle of the day is sorry. So the start and end times of the trial in terms of the daytime, and I appreciate some of those hours are antisocial. That's a safety issue that is the primary consideration that we've got. So we cannot operate mixed routes, if you like. When we put the trial in, the nature of trying to get the data as quickly as possible and the complexity of that area of airspace and the way that all those interactions happen mean that the level of safety work involved in a trial is quite vast, and it's heavily regulated before we get there. What's not feasible for us to do, unfortunately, is we cannot run a conventional route, if you like, for 40 minutes or an hour and then mix it and swap it, because the way that the system works, I appreciate it's not a pleasant answer, but the way that the system works is the interaction of a whole load of systems that we've got as the air traffic provider, a database in the aircraft, and they're updated at certain key points. There's an update cycle every month that's safety regulated again to make sure that all the data is accurate and correlates. So it's unfortunate that we're not able to do that, to be able to say, okay, we'll be standard operations until 10 in the morning and then we'll run this. It has to replace the full departure, if you like, the full route.
Why can't you plan in advance 2 or 3 hours at a time?
It's just we can't slot it into the network, I'm afraid. The safety, the way that the interactions work in there, the level of complexity that we operate, we have to train every controller for the period of time that it's coming in, explain all the changes, it moves interactions and the way that aircraft are handled, and it's just, in terms of safety, human performance and all those other technical issues about where you update databases, unfortunately it has to be a full replacement for a period of time. Sample size?
I do want to come back on that. Sorry.
Number of aircraft was the other.
Yeah. I'm sorry. You have the time to change the time slots on which runway moves. The question was at 11:30 at night, the heavies fly directly over this village. That's what's causing your problem.
Okay, so that'll have to be an airport question, I'm afraid. I can't.
I'll pick up on the timing issue, but just to be absolutely, so what Chris is saying is we do these trials in periods of months because the aircraft upload into their flight computers the information on which routes they're going to fly, and we can't just say for a few hours we'll do this, for a few hours we'll do that. It just wouldn't be safe, and safety is absolutely the priority here. In terms of timing, so we are aware that so the last scheduled departure from Heathrow is just before 11 o'clock at night. We are... Okay? Yeah, no, I have... Okay, I hear a strong view on this. If you would just let me explain the situation. I know people feel strongly about this. The last scheduled departure, when the aircraft are due to leave, is before 11. However, typically, at the end of the day, because Heathrow is an airport that is completely full, it's operating at capacity, that by the end of the day, it's normal that some delays will have built up at the airport. So it's unusual that the last departure goes off at 11 and there are no aircraft after that. Sorry? No, I said it is unusual that the last aircraft departs by 11 and there are no aircraft after 11. Normally, Some departures are running with some delay by that time of day, so normally there will be some departures between 11 and 11:30, and occasionally some after that as well, and I acknowledge that, absolutely. I'm not, of course. Well, the first, we have night restrictions at Heathrow between 11:30 at 6 in the morning, and the first... Sorry?
Yeah, we've already explained that.
Sorry.
I think we have explained that flights do get delayed and they are going later. I don't think there's any denial of the fact that flights are going over Englefield Green towards midnight sometimes. So I think that's been accepted and acknowledged. Mr. Lamb, I see you've been raising your hand for some time, so if you'd like to ask a question.
We've been hearing a lot about the benefits of these trials, technically, the benefits that will accrue to Heathrow, no doubt, to air traffic control, to everybody involved in the technical stuff, and also to people who are currently under flight paths. What I haven't heard is exactly what the benefits are going to be to me in terms of, we say, flight relief, noise relief. And also, my understanding is that no noise monitoring was put in place, for example, in our village in Englefield Green, on the ground, until residents kicked up such a fuss that there are now a couple of monitors in a couple of disparate places. My question is really, and I suppose it's one to Philip Hammond and to our councillors, how are you going to ensure that people like us who are going to be impacted by whatever changes occur, how are we going to get something out of this, and how do we have any confidence in a trial, and never mind the trials when they're implemented, when you're going to be looking at data and you haven't even looked at the effect on the ground here? Now, on Englefield Green, in Englefield Green, we're at the first point, high point, as they turn hard left now as they do up the hill. We've recorded the lowest one as 1,300 feet above ground level, 1,500 feet, and engines on, presumably climbing to 4,000 feet. So that is the noisiest time for the heavy jumbos that people have been talking about going over late at night. Again, no noise monitoring here, and you're going to be doing noise computer modelling. I'm sorry, that doesn't really stack up. So again, my question is to Mr. Hammond and to our councillors.
Okay.
How are you going to get involved?
Okay, well, at the moment, it's trials, and I believe that Heathrow have been measuring the noise. Am I correct, Matt? And perhaps you might want to speak about that in a moment. So noise measuring has been taking place. As you know, a resident has noise measuring equipment installed in his building. Yes, that was a lot to do with the residents asking for that, but it has been done, so we're measuring that as well. Yes, but it's not that Heathrow have not been measuring it themselves. They have been. So do you want to explain the technical? Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to the earlier point. I perfectly understand the question, but the question is arising because people have gone into this period of trials without proper information. I think what we've just heard is that these trials are very specific in their purpose. They're about seeing how the aircraft perform in terms of their track keeping on this new technology. They're not about looking at possible routes. They're probably not primarily about measuring the noise impacts on the ground of any particular route. That would presumably be something that comes later when routes start to be designed. Now, I absolutely understand why people would be asking these questions because we haven't been given the information that we're now hearing tonight. But I hope that is the answer, that this is not primarily about measuring noise impacts at all. It's about measuring aircraft performance.
In your publication, it talks about flight paths. All you talk about tonight is routes, right? It says flight paths, right? So that's a route. That means it's flying over here, doesn't it? It says it in your publication.
So
It says flight path.
yeah, we will use flight paths or routes interchangeably. This isn't we are as
Sorry, don't use them interchangeably. You're either flying over here or you're not.
No, we are flying over here in the trial period.
In future, that's what we want to know.
So, what I've tried to explain is that we are the route has gone over here, but we've been using that. The route went over here because we needed to trial different distances between different routes, as Chris tried to outline. This is not that we thought, right, I've got some secret plan in my briefcase which says, right, the future around Heathrow is a flight path over Englefield Green. We haven't got to that stage. We're several years away from designing. But when we do that, just to be absolutely clear, this will be a significant consultation on all of the airspace around Heathrow, east into London, west of the airport, and there will be a huge amount of consultation on that. We will measure the noise at that time, we'll communicate what the impacts will be, and everyone will have a chance. I would just re-stress, and I'll keep coming back to this throughout the night, this is part of a government programme in the UK and across Europe to modernise airspace. We've been required by law to submit plans on how we modernise airspace around Heathrow. So we're doing our best to think about how we can use this new precision technology that allows planes to fly more precisely, to offer noise relief around the airport and to share noise a bit more fairly around the airport. There was a question at the beginning, I think, there, which I've lost now.
Can I just say we need to have some order this evening? There's been a couple of people who've been putting their hands up, and I will come to you. And we need to do it in turn, in an orderly fashion, to get through this evening. So I'm going to go over to Nigel, who has had his hand up for some time. Thank you.
Good evening. Perhaps I can come to the Heathrow's rescue here with regard to prior information about what was happening. I've actually taken the trouble to look at the agenda items and the minutes of the two committees in which they've used to inform local authorities and boroughs about what was going on. These are the Heathrow Airport Consultative Committee and the Local Authority Aircraft Noise Council. They made a presentation about the trials in December 2013 to the Heathrow Airport Consultative Committee. And unfortunately, I think Councillor Roberts is the appointed member for Runnymede on that committee. And according to the minutes, he sent his apologies, even though it was clearly shown on the minutes that, in fact, one of the key minutes was a half-hour presentation on the forthcoming trials. Okay. The second item I understand is that there was a similar presentation made to the Local Authorities Aircraft Noise Council in the middle of last year. Yes, correct? There we are. Okay, and again, I don't know whether there was a representative of Runnymede at that particular presentation. Was there any from Runnymede there? Or are they not even members of this committee? Are Runnymede part of that committee?
Peter, do you know anything about that? I'm certainly not a member.
This is the Local Authorities Aircraft Noise Council, and it is a liaison committee between Heathrow and all the neighbouring local authority boroughs who are affected by the noise created by Heathrow Airport. And it appears that Runnymede are not even members of the council. Okay. Absolutely appalling.
Okay. I would say that I know Councillor Roberts is a regular attendee of those meetings. I don't know if he was ill that day or if he had a conflict of meetings. I don't know. So I'm not going to speculate about why he wasn't there or not. I do know that he attends a hell of a lot of meetings. So I think that's slightly unfair. I'm looking to Peter to ask...
I'm very sorry, I disagree. There's something as important as this village, which is going to be ruined.
Right. Huh? Yeah.
If Councillor Roberts is not able to make that meeting, he should deputise someone to go along with him.
What's that? I don't believe we're allowed to sub at those meetings, I'm being told, so I'm afraid that wouldn't have been possible. But
I'm sure he had a copy of the minutes. I'm sure he had a copy of what was there to discuss. And I'm sure he was
okay. Well, we're not here to attack one individual person for maybe not attending a meeting because they were ill or anything like that. We're here to...
If you look at the agenda items, the minutes, you'll find that Councillor Roberts actually has not attended quite a lot of meetings that occurred on this particular committee in the last year.
Okay, well, maybe if he's unable to attend the meetings because he's leading Runnymede Borough Council, which is quite a big job, one of us will be able to do it in future and we'll stop that happening.
With respect, he is our representative.
Okay. But I do take umbrage with your point about ruining the village. As we keep speaking about this evening, this is a trial, and we're here now to try and tackle this and ensure that our village isn't ruined. We are all here this evening. We have been involved in this. So that is the purpose of tonight. So I don't think we should stray from the point of questioning Heathrow and working out how we move forward on this. I think you're harking over history here. We want to move forward this evening but get the best outcome for the village. We're all here. Our MP has come out of his very busy duties as Foreign Secretary to spend the evening with us, as has Heathrow, and you've all come out as well. And I know it's a Friday evening, and I think we all want a positive outcome from this evening. I think everyone would agree. So I'm going to move forward now, okay? I would like to take the gentleman in the front row, and then I'll move backwards to you two. Thank you. You can use my microphone.
Oh, thank you. Now, although this is all about trials, I have the feeling that the government, etc., is not just about trials, but it's about expansion. And So at the background, it's how to expand Heathrow. Now, we've already got problems with Holloway trying to expand in our village. Where is it all going to end? That's what I would like to know.
So I can repeat what I said earlier, and I know that some people will disagree, but this is nothing to do with expansion at Heathrow. If Heathrow stayed the same size that it is forever, we would need to redesign airspace. It's not just Heathrow. Every major airport in the UK is having to submit these plans and modernise airspace. It's part of a government programme across the UK, in turn part of a European programme to modernise airspace. You may or may not believe me, I can just repeat it again and again. It's nothing to do with expansion.
Gentlemen, if you don't mind giving your name, it helps me learn who you all are. Has anyone got a microphone for you? If you both want to ask your questions, if you pass the microphone back, we'll take them both at the same time. Thanks.
Nick Dixon, you mentioned that you have very limited capability within Heathrow to run these trials, and you're about to do another one starting in autumn 2015, and presumably follow-on ones. Does that mean that this area is going to be subject to a lot of the same sort of thing between now and whenever those trials finish? And secondly, what are you going to do to trying to make sure that we don't end up with the same early morning, late evening noise that we're getting from this trial?
Good question. I'll just take the gentleman behind and then we'll answer both of those at the same time.
Bill Shields. The airline industry now is changing the heavies from 4 engines to 2 engines as a positive philosophy in terms of noise abatement, economy and things like that. So we're going to see more and more heavy aircraft only with 2 engines flying over these routes. Are your trials including the possibility of severe or catastrophic failure of a single engine? Because we've seen an Airbus lose cowling and things like that. And I just wonder if if that's taken into account.
Okay.
I'll pick up on the first question, and perhaps, Chris, if you can take the second. So the first gentleman asked about... sorry, just remind me, my mind has gone blank. I'm struggling with more than 2 questions. The trial's next year. So, yeah, we...
And ongoing beyond that.
Yeah, so we genuinely don't know yet what we might need to trial next year. So what we've said is we'll gather, when the trials finish on the 12th of November, we'll gather all of the data from those trials and assess what we've learned. We're also going to look at developing our capabilities so we can do as much of the work as we need to using flight simulators and radar simulators rather than having to do live flight trials. I don't think it's right to say that just because we've trialled over this particular area that's a plan that we've got at all. If anything, I think if we did need to do trials in future, we'd look at doing those in other areas, partly to test different techniques away from Heathrow, but also to spread trials around the airport. I don't think it would be right to focus just on one area, but I don't know either way at the moment, to be absolutely honest. The question on safety, I'll let Chris answer, because it's more one for Nat.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is absolutely an overriding principle of safety. Nothing that's being done here has any impact on that at all. So all those scenarios you talk about of catastrophic failures, engine out procedure is actually very common aviation practice. So if you go from 4 engines to 2 engines, your excess, if you like, that you need to carry, you have to be able to operate on 1 engine. So as an example, to set your mind at rest, a 777, for example, is the biggest twin engine that you'll have around at the moment, has a single engine rate of 3 hours. It would have a very normal on departure. It would probably go back and sort that out. In midair, standard practice, it would fly for up to 3 hours to land. It's deliberately overpowered in order to do that. Everything that we do as an ANSP, I'm a safety man, I'm an air traffic controller, so all of that stuff happens number 1. All of this stuff about data gathering and trials and trying to improve things is number 2, but it's very far away from that overriding principle. So there is absolutely no impact on terms of safety, engine out, any of those criteria at all by what we do.
Okay. Bill, I hadn't seen you for a while, by the way. Nice to see you. Have you got any further questions? Are you okay on that? Okay. Yeah, that's another issue. I see the microphone being waved. I think somebody's already got it. So are you wishing to ask a question?
My name is Adrian Wojciech. I live in Englefield Green at the Dell, near the Fox and Hounds. and I'm a former British Airways captain on 747, so I know the routes that we're talking about. Can you bring up the map of the routes, the 3, 4, 4, 5, or whatever they were? Yeah, that's the one. What I'd like to know, and to reassure, and maybe I'm sure everyone else wants to know, is routes 3 and 4, is that pre-trial or...
That's pre-trial.
Can you put the pre-trial and the post-trial on, please?
So that's pre-trial.
Pre-trial.
That's the current MPR, so that's what the DFT, that's the current registration. So there's pre-trial.
Yeah. Can you put post-trial?
There's post-trial.
Okay, well, sorry, so everyone can understand, you'd have to go back to the previous pre-trial, the bigger, not next, back a bit. That's the one. Well, the original route 3 and 4, which as pilots we would have called the Compton departure, correct?
There's 2 there. So the one that heads straight away is the Compton departure.
Compton departure and the Southampton departure.
And the Southampton departure. Yeah.
Right. The route 5 is the Midhurst departure.
Yep.
And the route 6 is the Dover departure.
Dover Detling, yeah.
The area I'm really in this part of Englefield Green is route 5, route 3 and 4. Now, what you've done with route 3 and 4, for some reason, and I don't understand why have you moved it south?
It needs to force the angle. So because
of the angle.
You're technically trying to assess an angle, you've got to manufacture that angle somewhere. So because of the placement of Midhurst was replaced by the other route that you saw that cuts down, we need to get the answer or information that supports this move away from 45 degrees. So the reason it looks like that, if you happen to live under one of those routes, you're being constrained by a 45-degree rule that says that's the only place you can put it.
So I understand that. So that's what you're trialling.
Yeah, so what we've had to do is we've untangled the rope of 3 and 4, if you like, which is a Sam and Compton combined, and we've said, OK, we'll use those routes and we'll force the 10 and the 15, and that's what happens. The Midhurst, you move across, you do 10 degrees, you put the Sam, you move 15, you put the Compton, and in that footprint, you've assessed 3 potential improvements of angle in one footprint.
I think we're now entering the realms of a conversation between 2 real experts.
No, we're not. No, what I'm saying
the
is
rest of us may struggle to follow.
No, that's right. The people here. What's happened is route 4, if that's the Southampton departure, is the one that's gone straight over the top of Englefield Green. That's the one that most people are concerned of. It does. It's a fact. The Midhurst departure, because where we live and where I've lived in Englefield Green for the last 20 years, we used to put up with that. It was a fair route. We used to get it, and it wasn't a massively busy route. And I say, well, we get a bit of aircraft noise. We get our fair share. And we used to cope with that. And there was no complaints, really. What's happened is you've moved the Compton route further south, which makes it noisier for parts of Englefield Green. But the Southampton departure is a nightmare. Because what you've done, you've put the 2 routes, the Southampton and the Midhurst, straight over the top of Englefield Green. And I know you're trying angles, but that's the route, particularly, that would badly affect Englefield Green.
Chris, can you stop this Sam 1 Bravo Park 27 left tomorrow, if you wish to?
Because of the safety implications of the databases and the systems,
No, sorry. The databases on the aircraft got the on-air routes and the old...
Yeah.
I sense we might have some pilots in the audience.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. No, I'm
it's
not
a pilot area. We don't like noise. Pilots don't like noise.
No,
there's no need for it.
Sorry, I better introduce myself. I'm Frank Epstein. I work for an aircraft manufacturer based in Toulouse. But I did fly Southampton 1 Bravo last week out of Heathrow, so I think I know a little bit about it. There's 2 or 3 elements about what's going on. The trials don't look, in my view, at the vertical navigation enough. So the way the routing, the aircraft are climbing up, could be altered for more noise abatement trials. You haven't tested noise abatement departure of 1s or 2s, NADP 1s or 2s, and there's very techniques you could have asked the airlines to do to get more data.
I think you and I'm willing to engage in a private conversation, so there's a great deal. I don't think it's...
But yes, hang on. And the other element, because I must correct some of the guys said, because there's been incorrect information produced by the BAA guys once or twice. GPS has been around for a long period of time. It's not a new technique. So the aircraft navigation accuracy hasn't changed much in the last decade, or last 2 decades. That's all I want to say.
Okay, so the issue on track keeping is about data. It's not about the fact that... So the infrastructure, as you've seen from the ground beacons and the aids, is behind what's in the aircraft. What we're trying to do is capture the benefit and the accuracy of what's in the aircraft. So the track-keeping aspect of the trial is about unlocking the very thing you're talking about and saying, it's been in there for a long time. Forgive me for I'll briefly dip into detail. Conventional procedures, they have their own PBN overlays, which are done on per database, and they're packaged for each individual aircraft. That means you get a spread of performance. When you code a specific RNAV1 and you say, this is my governed route, you remove that uncertainty because everyone has to code to the same baseline, and that's why the track-keeping accuracy is so accurate. We are engaged in this with a number of airlines. This is a FAS project, as we've talked about the future airspace strategy. So there are a whole host of airlines that input into this and give us data on that. NADP 1 and 2 is part of a separate assessment that's being undertaken in terms of acceleration points on aircraft.
Okay.
So
I really think
Okay, that's...
I'm conscious we've got people, a BA pilot, someone who works for Airbus, who really know the detail. Many of you won't, so I'm going to try and lift us out.
There's a lady
of the
here wanted me to restate because the air traffic control gentleman was sort of shaking his head and basically not agreeing with what I said. Fair enough. Air traffic control has never agreed with pilots, but the Midhurst departure is the one that is the new departure, which excessively makes a lot of noise over Englefield Green.
Okay.
The Midhurst one always made a bit of noise, and that's, I think everyone's fair. We take our share.
Okay.
The Compton one didn't really used to affect us. It's now, because it's moved south off 27 left, off the left runway, is noisy.
That's not the proposal at the moment, though, remember. We're not at that point.
But as long as you acknowledge, please acknowledge that the Midhurst departure is the noisy one. Sorry, the Sampson departure.
So I think it's if you like, the mid has come more aggressively and turned left. So you've got the mid and the SAM in a capture area. I'm not disputing that at all. If I
going over the top. They're like that. The angles are good. I can let you know there. They're 15 degrees.
Thanks. Okay, I've got, I think, 6 speakers, and I'm going to go from the back 2, and then I've got 3 at the front, so you don't have to leave your hands dying in the air. 3 speakers at the back, and it was a gentleman, I think you've got a red jumper around your shoulders that have been holding on for a long time, and then another red man, and then beige. Okay?
Yep, I'm Bill Markham, and I'm wearing a red jumper over my shoulders. Heathrow and Nats have been monopolising the microphone, so this is a quick question for Philip before he has to nip off. I heard Heathrow say that they have no choice. I heard Nats saying that they're following government instructions. There is an election next year, and 725,000 people are affected by Heathrow air noise. What is the Conservative Party policy going to be entering that election?
On what? Europe? On what?
On factors which are going to affect how 725,000 people may actually put their voting according to this issue. What is the Conservative Party policy? That is the question.
Right, well, I'm not sure that I can give you Conservative Party manifesto policy, but the trial, the trial that we're talking about, the future airspace strategy, is a perfectly sensible strategic approach to look at how best to use our airspace in the future. We've got more than twice as many flights going on now as we had 25 years ago. We've got to use the airspace more effectively, and I personally would like to see something which I've referred to already as the Sydney approach. That was how it was presented to me 4 years ago, which is using a number of different routes, precision routes into an airport to ensure that nobody has to endure noise patterns for long periods of time. You get a burst of noise and then a period of relief. And I think we can do much better around Heathrow in the future by redesigning the airspace. We're not going to shut the airport down. I would hate us to shut the airport down because it is the pulsating heart of this area in terms of our economy and our prosperity. But as you also know, I'm personally opposed to the third runway at Heathrow. I think it's the wrong place to put it. And I'm sorry to Heathrow Airport, who don't agree with me on this, but I claim to be the author of what I still think is the brilliant concept of Heathwick, which is an extra runway at Gatwick and a high-speed rail link between Heathrow and Gatwick to get people between the two airports in 13 minutes. That is the solution.
I'm very glad to hear.
Does that get your vote?
I'm very glad to hear that you're opposed to the third runway. I will not vote for a party that actually supports it. And what is your party policy for the third runway?
Well, you stated it, haven't you?
No, I've told you what my personal position is. I think you will find, much to your frustration, no doubt, that all the major political parties will say that they will wait for the Howard Davis review to be published before deciding what they think the future runway in the South East strategy should be. I've made my input to Howard Davis, tried to persuade him of the benefit of the Heathwick approach. And I very much hope that he will take that forward.
Okay. Yes, the next red man.
Okay, David Curtis. I'm just going to ask, is it being denied that one of the aspects for the trials is to do with increasing aircraft traffic above Heathrow? The second part of the question is, my understanding is London Heathrow is the most polluting airport in the whole of Europe, even so much so that the levels of pollution has meant that we're actually going to be fined 300 million euros by the EU. So if we are looking at increasing traffic, I mean, the question is how are we actually going to reduce the pollution? And also the aircraft that are actually taking off, they're on full power. So we're getting the full pollution and at a low level.
Let me take both of those just quickly. So there is a legal limit on the number of aircraft using Heathrow. It's 480,000 a year. We're close to that because we're nearly full, but that's a legal limit. We can't go above that. So this is about making Heathrow more efficient and more resilient. So if you travel from Heathrow, if you watch the news, you'll know that if we have very bad weather, if we have snow, if we have strong winds, because Heathrow is so full, there is very little resilience, so delays can build up quite quickly. This is about making Heathrow more efficient. It's not about increasing. There's a legal limit on the number of aircraft that can use Heathrow. That's very clear. In terms of pollution, I'll give you the really quick answer on this. I'm happy to send you some more information. Air pollution is a challenge actually across major cities, not just in the UK, but across Europe, and is primarily an issue of road transport, surface transport. So pollution from aircraft at Heathrow does exist, but when they climb above a few hundred feet, actually it disperses very quickly. So the big issue is not, if you look at a pollution map of London, it looks pretty much like a road map of London, and that's because the pollution follows the main road. So the big focus, we're doing a lot to make aircraft cleaner and encourage cleaner aircraft at Heathrow, but the big challenge for us all collectively is to make road traffic cleaner across the UK. New vehicle standards are doing that. At Heathrow, our focus is encouraging more people to come by public transport.
I do believe that part of it is to do with actual particulates from aircraft themselves. I know it's more than just aircraft, but that it has seen that it is a major problem.
I hear whispers saying it's diesel that generates that. And you may also, a side note, I don't want to get distracted because it is a slightly separate issue. We are doing environmental pollution studies at the moment around this area, so as a council, but I think we really need to move on because our time's very, very limited now. Yes, you've been waiting for a long time.
Hello. My name is Hout Maat, and I'm coming here this evening and I hear from you, that's the main message I've heard, that it's about technique and about technology, and that you're using satellites, and it's communication between satellites and planes and on the ground. The part that doesn't make sense to me is if these trials go on around the world in different places, can you not learn this once? I mean, these planes are no different in Australia, in the US, or here. It's not on the ground. You've told us quite clearly you're not testing anything on the ground. You also say that you're trying to learn. But, if you've learned it in Atlanta, and you still haven't learned it while you're here, how are you going to learn in the future?
I agree with you. In a safety-critical industry, it is there are heavy levels of regulation and proof, and the burden of proof and where that sits. So the serious answer is there are two aspects to that question. I would love that because I would be at home in my pyjamas right now, and a number of other things would be better. So we have to prove it in the UK as it's the directly applicable airspace. So the Civil Aviation Authority regulates everything we do. We are not allowed It's not seen as appropriate for a number of technical and legal and other reasons that we cannot import safety case data from elsewhere in the world. So there's a big blocker there. Industry is trying to be smarter around that. We're sharing a lot more. We work with airlines, manufacturers, and other ways to get around that. But unfortunately, we have to do the work here to legally prove and open that up to our regulator to say this is an agreed way forward. And this project actually works under a special arrangement with our regulator because it's seen as a very key way to get that data together. So in principle, absolutely, I agree with you. It is the number one question. The reason I'm smiling is I get this every management meeting I go to explain what we're doing because it would be a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient to do it. The other driver to it is no one else has the constraints of our geography. So if you go to Atlanta and elsewhere, you'll find that the work they need to do is significantly less because their conflicting routes are already spaced what is perceived to be the safe distance apart today. There's already data out there that says you can be that far away and it's okay. What we've got in the southeast of England are a clutch of airports that are, and as the ANSP, we have a fair access policy. So Southend is as important to us as Heathrow, if Matt covers his ears, and everybody else. We have to make sure that everyone is on a level playing field with fair access. So the geography constraints that we've got of all those airports within 20 miles mean that us answering the question once would work very well the other way, and that's why unfortunately the trials require this much focus.
A very quick response to that. I'm glad that you say what you're saying, and I'm trying to understand it. The difficulty I've got is that we have to read between lines because we're not experts. And when I hear what you describe and you say, yes, we're trying to learn, to me this all comes across that you're actually in the process of implementing. You're not trialing techniques, you're actually implementing. Because the one thing that you said earlier on is you're not testing on the ground. If it is about localities, why are you not testing on the ground? So for me it sounds again like it's implementation. It's not testing of techniques.
I can only repeat what I said earlier. These are trials. We're trialling techniques. Redesign of airspace around Heathrow is several years away and would be subject to a full public consultation. Okay. I can't say any more than that. Okay. These are trials.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 more questions before Philip needs to go, but then obviously we will still be here for other questions. Michael.
Thank you. Mike Sharp. Quick question. Your contours for Heathrow on Engleford Green show 60 decibels predicted for sound. We pushed as a committee, and I now have a sound machine in my garden. I've been pushing Heathrow for the results of that, and we did ask for tonight for the results to be shown, but you haven't come up with anything. Our records are showing 85 decibels being flown over Engleford Green, and I wonder how you feel. We have a war memorial here for 20,000 World War II victims, and surely your precise navigation should be taken precisely down the M4 and keeping closer to that and avoiding a quiet area. I mean, how do you feel about that?
So, a couple of responses to that. I think in terms of measurement, the really quick answer is there are different ways to measure noise. So one of the measures we use is average noise. I'll just direct this to the gentleman who asked the question. There is an average noise measure, which is where the 60 decibels will come on. Clearly, if a specific plane goes over, it could well be louder than that, so your measurement may well be right. And we need to produce both kinds of measurements, both for the government and for our own analysis, so that could explain the difference. In terms of, I suppose, the real challenge we're trying to meet here is that Heathrow, as the Foreign Secretary has said, is a hugely important airport in the regional, for the region, for the local area, actually for the whole country, and really brings big benefits. We're absolutely aware that there are some downsides to living near an airport like Heathrow. We're trying to ensure that we can reduce noise as much as we can. Quieter aircraft are coming in. Heathrow has more of those than any other airport in Europe. There's lots we're doing, but we're also looking at how we can use this new technology to share around. Unfortunately, not every single departure from Heathrow would physically be able to fly down the M4, because actually some of them want to go north, east, west, they can't all fly one way. So we do need to look at sharing, and I think I would just come back to the Sydney model that's been mentioned. Sydney is, again, close to a big city, but it's come up with what appears to have been quite an effective model for sharing noise, as the MP said, giving bursts of noise, but then giving breaks from the noise, and that's what we're looking to try and do here.
Okay, thank you. 2 gentlemen, I think you were battling out for questions, weren't you? So if I take both of those, yeah. Can you stay for 3 questions, Philip? Yeah, okay. We'll do those and then we'll come to you, these 2.
Okay, you say that safety is the paramount thing for the flights, and these trials are all predicated on GPS. In March this year, half the GPS went down for 13 hours. What fallback systems, or what fallback are you going to have if they all go down?
So again, that's something that is heavily factored in. So there are GNSS is number one in terms of how you're able to navigate with this technology. There's also different types of beacon on the ground called DME coverage. The fallback method you can fall back to is DME, which is effectively triangulations giving you a satellite position in space. We have enough. We're in what's called a DME-rich environment in the south of England. There are so many of those beacons that you can accurately navigate to standard.
Are you going to switch those off?
From those? No, we're switching off the VORs. We're leaving the DMEs precisely for that reason.
That wins the prize for the most acronyms in the answer to any one question this evening. I think I got that, but it may be a specialist question afterwards.
Okay.
To make a quick comment and then a quick question, if I may. Philip, you talk about a burst of noise and then relief. Can I just make the comment that a burst of noise at 6:30 in the morning and then relief and then more bursts of noise at 11:30 at night won't get my vote, I'm afraid. But can I just make sure that everyone up there is aware of an issue which doesn't quite get mentioned? We all know how the before trial airport works, where the planes went. We don't buy 600, 700, 800,000 pound houses without doing a bit of research. This notion of sharing the noise, I don't think that should be the holy grail. We know where the quiet areas are. We know where the noisy areas are. We paid a bit of a premium to live in a quieter area. Why should we now have noise shared?
Okay.
No, I hear that challenge. I think it is a challenge. I come back to the challenge around Heathrow. It's a busy airport. We've been asked to redesign airspace. We've been told we need to do some things differently because the current technology is changing and current airspace won't work. We're trying to do that in the best way that we can. I mean, equally, I've been to audiences. It is worth saying this. I know this isn't going to be a popular thing, but I'll say it for this audience, that some communities around Heathrow have benefited from these trials because we have been able to move some flight paths away from communities which have traditionally had all of the noise and to give some periods of relief. I do understand that if you've selected an area on the basis that it's going to be a bit quieter, this will be a real concern. I can only come back to the point and say these are trials of techniques. We're some way off talking about routes. There would be a full consultation about that. And I think we do need to factor in that noise preferential routes, as you've said, have been in place for many years. So we need to work out how can we draw on that route structure as far as we can, but also make some of the changes that we need to. As I said before, it's not going to be an easy journey. We won't get it right every step of the way. I can only say that this kind of event is important to us to get your feedback and to try and get it as right as we can.
Okay, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Philip, for coming tonight. We know you've got other pressing things, so thank you very much indeed. I hear nobody can argue about new technology, and clearly we understand that has to go ahead. However, you've talked about safety and you've talked about efficiency. I haven't heard very much about health. And I would say that my understanding of efficiency is that efficiency means more or less cost. And we understand there is a cap of 480,000 movements per annum. I haven't heard from Runnymede Borough Council whether they support the 480,000 cap or whether they support an expansion of Heathrow Airport, and I'd like to hear that.
Okay. Matt, can I go over to you about the impact environmental, please, for a moment?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think there is some evidence that noise causes annoyance, clearly. I think that's why so many of you are here tonight, and that it may have some impacts on health. That's an area of research that we stay very close to. We look to the government to advise us on what are the right levels to meet around Heathrow, but our commitment is to continue to reduce noise. Just to put that in context, go back to the early 1970s. I was talking to someone here earlier about the kind of jets that were flying then. Around 2 million people around Heathrow were affected by noise, and that number's fallen significantly to around 200,000 over that period. So that's still too many. We're still committed to reduce it, but we have been able to demonstrate we've reduced a lot, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. On the Runnymede point, I'm going to go over to our Assistant Chief Executive to ask him for the Council's perspective. I can say, as a councillor, and I've just had agreement from 2 other councillors here, that we share Philip's view completely.
Okay. Yes, the Runnymede Borough Council position is that we support
the development of both Heathrow and Gatwick in terms of the economic impact that it has for our particular area. The strong caveat we've always had for that support is mitigation for impacts. 3 main impacts: noise, air pollution and surface access. And you'll know the position we went through in terms of air track and what that does to level crossings in Egham. There was a huge amount of concern about that. That project was dropped, and Philip Hammond was very much involved in that at the time. So the support, as I say, is very much based on that mitigation.
Do you hold 480,000 movements cap, or do you believe that that should be increased?
To be honest, I don't think it's actually been specifically considered because it is a legal cap. So there's been no proposal that I'm aware of to increase that. Obviously, if that was proposed, we would have to take a position. We haven't taken that. Why don't you take it now? Well,
I mean, my understanding is that unless you expand the operating hours, which would not be acceptable, or reduce the spacing between aircraft, which would not be acceptable from a safety point of view, you can't get any more in. It's operating at 98.8% capacity. With the current operating hours and the current safety-defined spacing, the cap is the cap.
Runway 3.
Well, absent runway 3, obviously. Yeah.
What are you saying? That will never be increased then? Third runway won't be more aeroplanes in the sky?
Well, if there was of course, if there was another runway, but on 2 runways, with a certain amount of time each day and a defined spacing between aircraft, the maximum number of aircraft you can fit in is a physical fact.
Unless you build a third runway.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Of course, if you built a third runway.
Third runway, more planes.
Well,
there would be no point for building the runway unless you could have more planes.
Runway to fly less planes, are they? Can I? Final question.
Yeah.
Go on.
I think there is one final question, gentleman with his hand up at the back, and then I'll hand over to Philip to start wrapping up, okay? If you'd like to speak, I think a microphone's on its way to you.
Looking at that picture, there's something I'm not quite sure on, and I'd appreciate this pilot just in front of me to give a comment on here. When I see an aircraft on a sharp turn, it always seems to be struggling more than on a straight general increase in height. Obviously, the honourable gentleman at the top know we live on the top of a hill. The gentleman in the white shirt there did say just several minutes ago that it's not possible for these aircraft to take off down the M4. Why can't they take off down the M4 with a general flight increase? They're obviously turning very, very sharply there for commercial reasons to save fuel. And they're turning with a big revving of the engine, going over a hill, which takes us much closer to the aircraft than down the M4. So something doesn't add up here.
So the left turn is the legacy route that's been in place for a number of decades that eventually it was referred to as the Dover route. It turns left and continues down that path. The MPR has been in place for a number of decades. So in terms of struggling, it's not struggling to do that. It's a perfectly standard aviation practice. It's throttling. The perception of the sound may appear different, I suppose, because the engines are exposed to you and the underneath as it turns the bank around. But it doesn't struggle to perform in that manner any more than it does on a straight ahead. In the future, in terms of where the airport chooses, I don't even want to step in, but in terms of where you would go, then obviously the whole point of trying to find out as much as we can in these trials, all this stuff I keep banging on about trying to get the data and work this out. Once you've got the data and you know how they're going to perform, then you know what you can do with it. So if there is an option to depart down a motorway or a main road or anywhere else that mitigates noise, then you would hope that would be part of the plans in terms.
Yeah, and just to be clear, these routes are designed in part because that's where the aircraft are going. So basically, these routes are heading to the north, to Scotland, to East Asia, to the Far East. These are going to America. These are going to Africa. Those are going to the Middle East and India. So, if we had every aircraft taking off down the M4 that way, then many of them would be heading in the wrong direction for where they actually want to go, which in itself will be a reasonably inefficient way of managing air traffic. So we've got, with all of this, we're trying to get a balance between a number of different priorities. The most efficient route for the aircraft, the most efficient separation, and also reducing noise.
Okay, we will continue taking questions, but Philip, I know you've got to leave us shortly, so...
I take away a couple of things from this. First of all, I would like to thank again the guys from Heathrow and Nats, because coming out on a Friday evening in order to be bombarded with hostile questions is probably not what those people who didn't decide to become career politicians would choose to do. For those of us who are politicians, we chose, so it's up to us. That's our problem. But I think that the very clear message that I've got this evening is that this trial is about techniques. It's about acquiring data about what it is possible to do with the aircraft and the technology. It's going to be over in just over a fortnight's time. We've got to draw a line under this. But what we now have to do is be very clear that when the next discussion starts, which is about how do we use this capability, how do we use this data to design the routes for future airspace, that is when the real debate begins. And actually, nobody's mentioned it this evening, but I remember a few years ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, there was actually a proposal issued for redesign of airspace, which caused virtual revolution across swathes of the home counties, because it did propose a radical redesign, a very radical redesign of the way we use airspace and where the routes go. So that will be the time when we can have discussions about whether we should take aircraft, for example, down the M4 further to the west to a greater height before we turn them onto routes which take them to their ultimate destinations. All of these things are able to be discussed, but to have a sensible discussion about them, we do have to know what the technical capabilities of airspace management are. And I would like to think that what this series of trials is about is acquiring that data so that when we move from the technical phase of this discussion to what I might describe as the more political phase, where do we put the routes? How do we alternate them? How do we change aircraft between routes so that we spread the impact in a way that is appropriate? We are at least going to have a well-informed debate at that stage. And I do think the point the gentleman here made, I'll call it the NIMBY point for the sake of description, that actually people do believe, because the noise preferential routes have been in place for a number of decades, that they are entitled to make some assumptions about, broadly speaking, where aircraft are going to be routed, and people have made very significant decisions on the basis of that information, not just about where to buy a house, but where to site other pieces of sensitive infrastructure. And I think we will be wanting to make that point in that coming debate, that there are a number of reasonable assumptions that people have held which need to be respected as we design the future airspace. But this is going to be a debate that will take place some years in the future, and there will be a very substantial consultation process around that. It isn't going to happen quickly. I think the other final point is that if there are further technical trials in this series which impact on this area, we have to be properly informed in advance, well in advance, not just by an item being put on an agenda at some obscure meeting that no one had ever heard of until tonight, but by widespread information, not so that we can try and stop them, but so that people can be properly informed about what they're doing, because everybody in this room's a grown-up. If people know what is happening, they understand what it's about, they're clear about the limitations of it, they will be able to respond to it in an appropriate way. There's nothing that's as guaranteed to get a negative reaction from people as treating them like mushrooms, keeping them in the dark and pouring nasty stuff all over them. Thank you very much for coming along this evening, and thank you everybody for turning out on a Friday night.
As you dart out, Philip, thank you for taking the time to come out for us.
Just before you go, I'm so sorry to hold you up just for a second. I'm Jane Snell, so it's... But we've heard it's a bit overwhelming actually being up here, but we've heard an awful lot from Heathrow about what will make a successful trial, and we've heard an awful lot about the technical side of things and data and technology and what have you. But what I've got in my hand is the other side of that, really, and it's 2,000 plus signatures from local people, and people telling me that they can't get their kids to sleep at night, and people telling me that they're woken up at midnight and then they're woken up again at 6 o'clock in the morning and they're suffering from sleep deprivation, and people who are concerned about the air quality and the noise pollution and the effect on health, etc., etc. And people who are concerned that their council didn't really care and that government don't listen to them. And also that for Heathrow, organisations like Heathrow, it's really just about making money. So for everybody who signed the petition, we've got well over 2,000 signatures here, and I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd just like to give this to you before you leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. He may have been expecting flowers, but a petition works as well. So, okay. I did see some other hands raised. I know Heathrow, you've got homes to go to as well. I'll refer to you as Heathrow collectively. But there were 2 other people wanting to ask questions, and I'd like to just use this opportunity to allow anyone to quickly ask those questions, okay? So if we can do that, and those of you who want to go, please go, okay? Lady in the white shirt, is there a microphone still around? You may have to shout over the noise of everyone leaving.
Hello. When the former pilot was speaking and said he saw planes going directly over Englefield Green, you were shaking your head. When I see that map, I see a line either side of Englefield Green, but I see planes going straight over Englefield Green. Am I suffering some kind of optical illusion, or are the planes actually coming right over the village, or do you believe they're going either side of the village?
There's nothing made up about the data that's put there. So that's a direct overlay taken from the radar that we use. So that's where they're tracking. There's no slip involved. So they're certainly closer to you. This business about me shaking my head, I can only apologise again. So it is a fact that the Midhurst route is a tighter turn and the SAM comes closer to the village, but they don't. Those tracks, depending on the sample size and where you saw it, I can't vouch for individual tracks and bad weather, but obviously an aircraft climbing trigonometry means that at 1,500 feet, 3,000 feet, it can appear closer.
And against you, when you publish the stuff on the internet,
I go to my wife for this.
Yeah, when you publish the stuff on the internet, looking at the Sampton route and the Midhurst route, I was looking at it, and actually, the map you put the routes over was just a rubbish map. It was just the scale. The scale wasn't there. That one doesn't really show accurately. Well, I mean, it does, but I mean, where the village is. It was hard to see where the line went over. It's because the map was poor.
Okay.
That's what I'd say about that.
Matt will take that.
Okay. You're all wanting to ask questions now. Blue. I will try and let you go in 10 minutes, Max. Okay. I know. So yeah. If you want to quick.
When will the results be published of these trials and conclusions drawn? And how soon after the November the 12th?
So, just before I say that, for people that are leaving, we've got a website. You can ask any questions, get in touch with us there. So we'll run for another 10 minutes or so now, but if you don't have a chance to ask your question, do email us. You can send it through. As soon as we possibly can after the trial. So they end on the 12th. I think we'll publish some of the raw data from the trials as soon as we can, numbers of movements and where they've been, but we'll clearly want to produce a proper report with some analysis in that. We haven't got a firm date for that, but I can commit that we will do it as soon as we can.
Okay. Yes, 2 gentlemen.
Yeah, hi. You're showing that you can follow a precise line. But there's no indication at the rate at which they're climbing. And are they climbing as steeply as they can?
We have got some information here which we can make available just on the kinds of heights. This is over over Englefield Green, the different heights of different aircraft, and you can see there is quite a range here. I'll invite Nats to support me, but different aircraft climb at different speeds. So typically, some of the smaller short-haul aircraft from Heathrow will climb very rapidly from the airport. Some of the larger aircraft, those with 4 engines, will climb a bit more slowly. So it does vary aircraft to aircraft. Chris, I don't know if there's anything to add on that.
Yeah, so the actual climb rate out of the airport is totally unaffected by this. That's governed by how the airline operates the aircraft. It's because of the move of the route, you've got a few less track miles or a slightly shorter distance to do that. So obviously, when you draw a straighter line, there is less distance for them to get height on. But the figures here broadly show that it's a negligible change. It's a change of the order of single percentages, about 2 or 3%, I think, without the detailed maths to hand. So the climb rates are unaffected because it's a slightly more direct track. You will see some slight change.
Yes. We talked about the outgoing flights, but we haven't talked about the incoming flights and how that's going to be affected.
So all of the trials that we've been doing at the moment are for departures, and we should probably have explained this up front, but aircraft need to land or take off into the wind, and most of the time in the UK the wind comes from the west, so about 70% of the time aircraft from Heathrow are departing towards the west, so over this area, and we've been testing departures when aircraft take off towards the west. Actually, we've also been running some trials when aircraft take off towards the east, which is around 30% of the time. At the moment, as part of this programme, we're not trialling any changes to arrivals. As part of the airspace design, we'd need to look at that, but that hasn't been part of the trial at the moment.
Final question. Sorry, I know you've been waving for quite some time. Yeah.
Yes, really, it's back to the council, actually. This has been a very disruptive period, and I think everybody's a little bit afraid of what's going to happen in the future, having it demonstrated to them how noisy and how disruptive it can be. I'd just like to go back to the question, what is the council's position on the third runway, which clearly would affect us again, or could quite easily affect us in the way that this has affected us?
Okay, well, I'll ask Peter to give you his position, but when you say the council, remember it's made up of a number of elected councillors from all over the borough. Your councillors here today are opposed to the third runway. We're standing here. We are opposed to it, and we'd fight that. The council, however, is a collective force, so I'll ask Peter to answer that. You've got a microphone. I don't need to bring it over.
Yes, I mean, as was said before, there is no actual proposal at the moment. There are 3 options for future expansion, one of which is Gatwick and 2 are Heathrow. The council's current position is subject to mitigation and would support expansion.
Tim, you might have to shout if there's no microphone.
Thank you, Marissa. We've heard quite a lot this evening about a lot of the technical aspects of these trials, but I just want to focus in on 2 things that I've heard Heathrow harping on about, which is the emotive words respite and fairness. And I suppose my question's in 2 parts, really, because respite and fairness for who?
Okay.
And the second one is, really, is it Heathrow's gift and responsibility to act as an arbiter of fairness?
No, it will. I mean, the final decision on this will go to government, am I correct? You'll give them your facts and evidence, and they will make the decision.
Yeah, the final decision will be government. Sorry, late on a Friday evening. We've been harping on about these things because we think it's the right thing to do to try and balance the benefits Heathrow brings, but to spread noise as fairly as we can to offer respite. And we think that because from all of the discussions we've had over many years with communities, that's what we hear. Ultimately, we're not the arbiters in this. We're trialling, we'll put a proposal to government, and it's the government that will ultimately need to approve that and make that change. We think we're doing the right thing. Listen, if all of the consultations we have around Heathrow say, look, we don't want respite, we don't want to share the noise, we just want to keep it on the current routes and leave it absolutely concentrated there, and with precision navigation, it will get very concentrated on those routes. If that's the result, we'll do that. We're not harping on for the sake of it. We're harping on because from all of the conversations we have, people tell us, on balance, it's the right thing to do. We are trying to do the best thing here. It will not work for everyone.
Can I just come back on one point there? Because when you're talking about fairness, you're talking about equality being applied. But as one gentleman already said earlier on tonight, we're 200 feet higher than everywhere else. So we're already at a distinct disadvantage.
So that may be one of the issues we take into account in this process. We'll have to look at all of this. These are not specific routes. We're testing techniques. We are trying to do the right thing. We've heard over many years from community that respite is important. If through all of this process people say, throw that idea out, look at something else, we'll do that. The government will decide. The government will decide. I can't stress that enough.
I think that's very clear, and that's okay. Thank you for coming. I know it's been a long evening, and we asked you at short notice, and I think everyone needs to understand Heathrow do have to do this. It's not that you're not doing it you're not doing it of your own will. It's something that has to be done. So I think actually, even though the beginning of this process started badly over lack of communication, I have to say Heathrow have been very communicative from here on. They've had meetings with us. They've answered the phone every time we've called. They've answered emails, and I know Philip's had a lot of dialogue as well with them. So I would like to say thank you, and I think everyone does appreciate your time this evening. I'm not going to have the final word. I'm going to leave it to Mike to close the meeting. Okay?
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. First off, I've heard lots of things of political issues on who would do what. I don't believe any party can do anything differently if this was a trial that was forced on the airport and they've had to do it. I don't live in a £600,000 house, but I do have children, and my concerns around safety are equal to any other parent in this room. So a lot of us struggle that this trial, that although it's been forced on you, is bringing these aircraft tight and overpopulated areas. And you were asked a question earlier about safety, and your answer was an airplane can fly for 4 hours on one engine. I accept all of that. But then I look at the catastrophic disaster Concorde had when it left Paris. There was a catastrophic disaster when a plane left Heathrow and landed in Staines. There was an A30 that had a full failure. So I'm, as a parent, not as a politician, I'm concerned that your trials are bringing these right over our village at low levels. I appreciate the trials were forced upon you. Jane made comments about the council. Jane's had full consultation with the councillors as it's gone. In fact, I signed her petition as soon as I saw it online. At least I think it was your petition, I hope. And right, so, again, councillors have responded very quickly as soon as they were involved. So we're hearing the voice of people telling you our fears. So all of your safety statements were about the safety of your aircraft. We're concerned about the safety of our children on the ground when these planes are coming over our populated village. And the prior flights did take them out west over the reservoirs, motorways, and yes, if a plane hit a motorway, it's devastating, but like Lockerbie, if a plane hits a housing estate, that's my concern as a parent, be it a 200,000 or a 600. Yes, it is a question. The question was you answered, when you answered the safety issue, no, not...
Why don't you speak to them now as they're leaving? Because we have taken...
Because I can't answer that question that gentleman asked that wasn't answered.
I thought we were on closing comments. Let's do a very quick response to this.
I said I wanted the question.
Okay. Let's do it. Chris, you want to just do a quick response?
It's a very emotive question, and I don't want to answer it in terms of it will sound dismissive, and I don't want to say that. So all I would say is that the safety of the aircraft inherently offers safety to your children in that scenario, because the two things go hand in hand. If I'm talking about aviation safety because that's the arena that I operate in, the association of that is the impact on the ground and the safety on the ground. And as I said, I'm not a statistician, but the statistical argument for aviation safety is that it's safer than crossing the road and all those things. But I don't want to. That's not my area. But the safety of the aircraft is inherently impacting that thing you're talking about.
My final thing, I do have a request of the airport. Is obviously it was pointed earlier that the National Monument, which is the RAF Memorial, is based here. Your trial ends on the 12th.
Oh yes, it's the 9th, isn't it, or the 10th? Yeah.
It's on the 10th.
Can you stop all flights?
Out of respect for what we do here, because we have people come from all over the world to that National Memorial, are we able to calm it around Remembrance Day?
That's It's a big question.
I don't know is the honest answer, but I will take it and have a look. That's all I can say tonight.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And just finally, closing comments are, we're all in this. We're all experiencing it. You know, residents and councillors, so we're not just ignoring you or not taking this seriously. We really are. It's just we want a rational way forward here that we can all work together to make sure we get the best outcome. And I think we now have good dialogue with Heathrow. Our MP has been supportive, and I think we can move forward positively from this evening. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy your weekend.